blow it in the playoffs.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Puck and Leafs podcast. I'm Joe Choffs with my boy, Coach Frank, and Bobby Bottles could not make it for today. So it's just us two, the true Leaf fans, going back and forth. And what can we say? Friday was a big day in Leafland. The first domino of the Maple Leafs offseason fell, and that domino was Kyle Dubas. It left many of us in shock because essentially we all thought that this thing was really close to being done, a contract extension. By all intents and purposes, this thing was on the 1 yard line. And then it all kind of fell apart, starting with Dubas's press conference on Monday, where he went into, it was a really tough year for him and his family. Didn't know if he wanted to do it. Threw that out there, which, according to Shanahan, was news to him. Hadn't heard it before. And I guess I'll start, and the first thing I'll ask you, Frankie, is how did this thing fall apart and who is to blame?
Depends who you. Oh man, you know the Captain America movie there, Civil War? You're either on one side or you're on the other. And
there's no in between. No,
there's no in between. It's you're going to get different answers from different people, and obviously you've seen a couple of the group chats we've been blowing up, and there still are, because it's just like, how can this happen, Joe? For me,
it's back and forth, right?
There's
people on both sides.
But see, Joe, I think one of these things is where, regardless of who you think is at fault, I think it's safe to say that both sides are at fault. Both sides drop the ball.
I agree with that. Yep.
So at the end of the day, you're now stuck in a position where there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of head scratching. I think even the players that are coming back are saying, what the hell's going on? There's people leaving. Jason Spezza left not too far back, which, sad to see, but he really was Dubas's guy because he was a special assistant to the general manager. And without a general manager there, I'm sure he's going to follow him wherever he is. So
I think that was big, though, Frankie. Like, Spezza loved being a Leaf, and he took league minimum salary for 3 years, and then he worked along Kyle Dubas. He loved this team. He wanted to win a cup with the Leafs. Doesn't matter, player, in management, whatever. And that for him to take Dubas's side after that and just submit his resignation, like, I thought that spoke volumes.
See, a lot of guys respect and follow Jason Spezza for what it is to be a Maple Leaf, both, with this, obviously, with the uniform on and without. I guess they call that he has the passion. So for him to leave,
trademark.
I couldn't even tell you what he did with the management team. He's probably learning as we go, but I think just the stature of him, the fact that, his presence probably, speaks volumes. So, again, we're not going to cry over spilled milk. It is what it is. I do expect a lot more people, to be quite honest with you, to bow out of their position. Let's not forget here, Kyle Dubas over his term has hired so many assistant general managers. It's the largest collection of management team in the league by far. You have Brandon Pridham, Haley Wickenheiser, like Wes Clark on the personnel side, Spezza assistant general, special assistant. It's just on and on and on. It's like, he hired them, right? So again, you might see you're probably going to see loyalty to the Leafs or loyalty to Kyle Dubas. And I think, more and more is going to happen. So, Joe, I really can't say either way how to make sense of this, but I just want to see if I want to summarize how I understand this, because I think you and I maybe don't see eye to eye here. So here's how I understand this, timeline wise. Shanahan tries to sign Dubas. Dubas indicates he will probably sign. Shanahan tells him, don't go to your press conference. We'll do it when everything's kind of signed, sealed, and delivered. Dubas kind of double crosses Shanahan in his end of the season presser and talks about his family, which kind of surprises him. Shanahan tries to sign Dubas again. Dubas asks for more money, but says he wants to come back. Shanahan fires Dubas. Is that a pretty accurate timeline?
It's like wrestling, man. It's like
It
someone double
is.
crossed someone and Dubas got stone cold
It
stunnered by
is.
Brendan Shanahan.
So we really don't know. But can I say, before we move on, can I say, for a city that keeps things, or for an organization that keep things pretty tight-lipped, we got two hell of a press conferences of bombs and like
Amazing.
shrapnel everywhere. And I couldn't believe, for a guy we don't hear of or from so much in Shanahan, he took 12 minutes to break down a timeline between start to finish. And I think a lot of that was anger, frustration, maybe to a point of exposing, Kyle Dubas in this situation. And obviously he's going to take the side of the people that signed his paychecks and management. But what I also saw that, Joe, is, I think Shanny used Dubas as an example to the core in this roster moving forward, that nobody is A, above this organization, and B, this ticky-tack BS going back and forth, it stops now. And I, for one, give Shanahan a lot of credit for that. I don't know what damage that's going to cause, because I can't say, we don't know who's coming in, but I think he took a step in the right direction to be like, okay, guys, enough. The new guy's coming in is putting his foot down, and let's see what happens.
So do you think it's like a message to especially the core guys who are up for new contracts, like, hey, you're not going to get every single dime that you want this time if you want to be a Leaf?
Yeah, perhaps. Joe, we can say anything we want about the Montreal Canadiens, and obviously, being Leaf fans and stuff. But one thing about Montreal is, like, you feel, every time you see what they do for presentation and honoring numbers, it feels like a historic organization. Like, people.
And I age a year every time they do it because it takes
I know that
an hour
it's,
long. Yeah, I know.
that when they bring the torch out, it's like a 4-hour presentation.
Yes.
But they have that allure to them that I wish the Leafs had more of. Obviously, winning is a big part of that. But somewhere along the lines, when Shanahan came in here, he said he wanted to get this team back up to, respectability and honor and tradition. And he started with that. But again, to me, it feels like they've been looked at as more of a joke the last couple of years around the league, and easy to play against. And we've talked about it on and on. And I think he now has associated, or it's been associated with him, because he's brought in a guy who is more analytic heavy, looking at
I don't necessarily agree with that. A lot of his moves did not lean analytic.
No, but what I'm getting at is it's a total 180 of the player Shanahan was, right? We thought it was going to happen with Lou when he brought him in, and obviously that didn't work out. He went full bore with Dubas and this old analytic type of movement, and Shanahan's far from that, and he's been associated with that too now, which I've always been disappointed with. But hey, here we are.
I'll say this, like, whether you're on Team Shanny or Team Dubas, it doesn't matter what side you're on. You would probably agree that the timing of this could not be any worse for this organization. We are going into the most important offseason of my lifetime of being a Leaf fan. I'm 37 years old, probably in a half century. A lot of important heavy lifting has to happen this offseason, and you're going to hire someone now, and they're going to have about 5 weeks to do all that heavy lifting. My problem is that if you wanted to fire Dubas, you should have done it last offseason, or
Correct.
Extended him last offseason.
Correct.
This whole bringing him in for the last year of his deal with a lame duck GM, so to speak, was a stupid idea. It was. And part of the reason maybe why Dubas asked for more money last minute was because, well, you put me through being a lame duck GM the whole time. I had to answer questions about it all year round. I want to be more highly compensated for being a GM in this market, which is a fishbowl, and it's tough to do. It's a tough job. Being the GM in Toronto is harder than being the GM of Edmonton. It just is, because there's more eyeballs and more people care about this team. Here's what I'll say about them not renewing his contract. If Shanny would have came out right after the season had ended and he said, we're going to move forward in a different direction because we expected more and we didn't do enough, one series win in this whole time, this is a results business, we're moving in a different direction, I would disagree with the decision, but I would understand it, and I'd be like, you're right. It's results oriented. I get it. Fine. I wouldn't be as upset for that. What I have a problem with is Shanny saying that he thought that Kyle was the best man for the job on Sunday and thinking this for months. And then on Monday, because Dubas had this feeling about his family and it was a hard year, a moment of doubt whether he wanted the job, you changing your mind off of a feeling. This organization has made decisions based off gut feelings and hunches for a long time, and it burned them many times, and they were a terrible team. And for the last couple of years, there was at least process behind those decision making, even if the decision didn't work out in the end. What I also have a problem with is the notion that, it was because he asked for the more money. It's a financial thing. Listen, these are the Maple Leafs we're talking about. Money ain't a thing here, or at least it shouldn't be. If you thought he was the best guy for the job on Sunday, then whether he wanted $1 million, $2 million, whatever more, just give him the money because that's who you think is the best man for the job. And this is the Maple Leafs we're talking about. That money is peanuts for you. And the number one thing that I have a problem with, when Brendan Shanahan goes into his boss's office, Bell, Rogers, Larry Tannenbaum, whoever it was, and he says to them, you know what, guys? You know how I'd been mentioning that we should extend Kyle for the last couple of months? I changed my mind now. I want to go in a different direction. Okay, Kyle, you've got all this heavy lifting to do this offseason. Who do you have in mind? I haven't got there yet. I'm going to start interviewing guys now. In that instant, if I'm one of those owners, I'm saying, no, Brendan, you're fired because of that. How do you make a decision with this important of an offseason and now you're just interviewing people? And that's what drives me nuts the most about it, is there was no plan B, because Kyle Dubas was the plan A all along, and you changed your mind off a gut feeling in a matter of days. That's my soapbox.
You make some very valid points. My thing with this is what confidence or what gives the MLSC executive board the okay or the kind of drive to move forward with Brendan Shanahan. Like, I'm actually kind of surprised if this was the case, they both didn't get fired. You know what I mean? Like, literally, that opens up more of a field to bring in somebody new because, you and I were going back and forth about this, so I'm sure we'll get it to. Who's going to want to work for Shanahan? If there's a guy coming in as a GM, especially a name or someone with a lot of notoriety and a lot of experience, they kind of want to run the ship. Are they going to be okay with the hierarchy of, well, if you want to make a move, Shanny has to put a stamp of approval on it, maybe even the board, if it's that much of a financial commitment, who's going to want to come here, but also be an experienced guy that has bite, apparently, as what Shanahan's looking for. He's already starting to narrow himself in terms of possible candidates, right? So you're right, Joe. I think the timing absolutely sucks, considering 6 weeks from July 1st is not a lot of time. Getting ready for the draft in 5 weeks is not a lot of time. I just usually, I think, when they fired Lamoriello, when they let go of when Shanahan had to hire a new GM. As soon as Lamoriello was fired, it was fortunate enough that he got him. There was a quick news release. He was in there. When they decided to let Lamoriello go, not renew his contract, Kyle Dubas was bang in there. It was a plan. It was a succession plan. This just reeks of hurt feelings, and the fact that the board let him do that based on, he's not going to make us look like a fool anymore. And I got nothing up my sleeve. You can understand why fans have this type of, oh shit, here we go again. We have the dark ages upon us, right? So, we talked about having being 6 weeks out from July 1st, 5 weeks out and a bit from the draft. What are the chances that this team can find a competent general manager in that time, uncertainty about the coach, but turn to Austin Matthews and say, hey, everything's okay, man. This is the direction we're going. Here's what you should sign for. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't give you that feeling that everything's under control. And one thing about Kyle Dubas, and when he was here, you kind of felt like things were under control. There was a plan in place. There was a direction, a vision. And with those player exit interviews, a lot of those guys went to bat for Dubas. How much they really appreciated him. And like I said, I would too if he handed out all that money to me and lack of negotiations. But there's just a lot of uncertainty right now, Joe. And I always say with everything.
And there didn't need to be. That's the problem.
No,
and
exactly.
I'm feeling that from a lot of people in Leafs Nation is that at the end of season pressers, Austin Matthews, my intention is to sign, and before July 1st, he wanted to re-sign. And now it throws that all up in the air. And it's just unnecessary at this time.
Yes and no.
Sign him to a 3-year deal, extend all the guys, and then fire him next year if you don't because again, the money doesn't matter.
Joe, yes and no. I think, it's not like he came out and said, I'm going to stay here because I'm here for Kyle Dubas. No, he wants to be a Toronto Maple Leaf. They're not going to go to him and
I hope so, Frankie, because I'm getting bad vibes.
Joe, so am I. But what I'm trying to get at is they're not going to go to him who, again, Shanahan, is part of those negotiations. I don't think he's not going to ever be part of it because he's got to give the rubber stamp, right? But what I'm trying to get at is they're going to say, Austin Matthews, we're not rebuilding, we're not retooling. They're still a 100-point team, 100-point plus. The window's still open. They have $20 million to spend in free agency and trades, which hasn't been like that since 2016, 2017, right? So the guy coming in is going to have a lot of toys to play with. They're going forward, right? So I don't see how things really change from a team standpoint in terms of the direction or how good the team is, because they're probably going to be pretty decent again, Joe. So I think you were right in a sense where if they were retooling, he probably would have said, hey, listen, get what you can get from me now and, we'll go. But now, every day that passes that a GM is not in place, the leverage shifts over to Austin Matthews.
Of course it does.
And that's the scary thing.
So now they've got to hire someone. So let's talk about some possible candidates. And, many of the big insiders have reported names like Tree Living and what were some of the other ones out there? We're both having a brain freeze.
Ray Shuro, I've heard.
Yep.
I've heard
Mike Fuda.
Mark Bergevin. So a lot of retreads.
Yeah. Peter Chiarelli, I even heard his name
But again, the names that were thrown out there were in response to Brendan Shanahan saying that having a candidate that has experience would be an attractive asset. Now, he didn't say
it's a must.
A must,
yes.
But he's kind of indicating that's what he's kind of looking for. So, read between the lines. I would be more than fine with a very experienced assistant general manager because they do a lot of the legwork anyways for GMs.
Would you be okay if they hired Brandon Pridham to be the lead dog?
I'm glad you asked that because he's one of those three names that I was going to go through. But yes, Joe, the guy wrote the cap. To me, he's the real MVP beside Kyle Dubas doing those cap gymnastics. Does he have a hockey resume? I don't know. I don't really care. But he has familiarity with the organizations. He has been in the negotiations with Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and William Nylander. He was hired before Kyle Dubas, if people recall. He's been with the organization since 2011, I believe. I got to check my facts. 2011, 2012. So he's been there before Dubas. So he's not a Dubas guy per se. Wasn't brought along with Dubas. So that's why maybe he's working, right beside Brendan Shanahan. I just think even from a time standpoint, he runs that. Wes Clark runs the draft. It's almost like a default move if you really think about it. He's good right now for now. So yeah, I'd be okay with it.
Now there is a notion out there that, listen, this is the Maple Leafs. It's an enticing job. They've got star power. They've got good players. They've got a lot of cap space, like you mentioned. Maybe there's a guy that we're not even thinking about right now who's with another organization who looks at the opportunity here and says, hey, I think I'm interested in making that switch. Is there a guy out there that you would like and who actually might be available to do something like that?
Who I like, yes. Who's available? No idea. It's without talking about tampering and all of this. From the last episode, and we were on, Robbie and I were on with Mike Richards. I'm halfway there. I said Dubas wasn't coming back. And the guy this is not just the general manager of the Columbus Blue Jackets, all due respect. This is one of the most historic franchises in the league. And there was a rumor out there that I heard on the radio, and I gave credit to him. Steve Koulias was on the radio, and he said that there was talking amongst GMs that Doug Armstrong actually was interested in the Habs general manager role before they hired Kent Hughes. That some of these GMs have an out clause in their contracts that allow them to go to other teams, and he called it the Notre Dame clause. I still have to look it up. So if that was still that's why I was floating that name out there in our chat. I just didn't come up with that because he's the Team Canada GM. He's an Ontario guy, right? Obviously, I think he said he was a Leaf fan as well growing up. Is it possible? Probably not. But where there's smoke, there's fire. And maybe there are other guys out there that this is the job that maybe they want to take. Maybe is it Ron Francis in Seattle?
What a guy like Doug Armstrong who does whatever he wants in St. Louis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he's coming to Toronto and gonna want to have to answer to Shanny? Because by all accounts, that's what Dubas had to do. He had to get final approval from Shanny to get deals done or moves done that he wanted to do.
Probably not, Joe. I'm not debating that, but let's not forget here. Brendan Shanahan carries the title of, and I'm just trying to bring this up here. I believe he is the president and alternate governor of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Correct? They don't.
What does an alternate governor do?
I don't know, but that's his.
That's some fancy wording right there. What
I'm trying to say is there is no president of hockey operations per se. Like he's, you know what I mean? Like I guess that could be him. But why not create a role? Why not? Exactly. Why not create that role for maybe he is the guy to say, listen, if you're going to come here, I will step away. Joe, maybe he ends up working for MLSE kind of on the whole, and Doug Armstrong gets. I don't know. You're probably right. I don't know. But there's so many possibilities. If you can lure a guy away, you do it, right? Especially a guy like Doug Armstrong's resume. Like, hello, you are not going to tell him what to do, right? So, anyways, that's a guy.
Yeah.
I honestly think too, Joe, that there are AGMs, assistant general managers out there that look at this, and we got some of the names that are interviewing for the Pittsburgh job, the Calgary job, those type of names. I would be okay with those guys too. And there's a couple on my radar as well. So I think it's going to be a vast search, but I also think, as you mentioned, there will be names that nobody's talking about. Them like, oh my God, he's available. And, I guess I got to be the guy to throw that name out because he did. Apparently, this guy interviewed for Calgary. Stan Bowman's name's out there. I'm just saying his name
for a coach, because I think we could all agree that Sheldon Keefe is not going to be coaching this team next year because it's a new GM, and a new GM's going to want his own guy.
Exactly.
One of the names out there as a potential coach would be Joel Quenneville, and he 100%. Would have to get reinstated by the NHL first. He certainly has an incredible coaching resume, but what he did in Chicago, that might be too much for the organization to overlook, especially we know this organization doesn't like to put out bad vibes like that, if you know what I mean. So him and Bowman, I don't see that happening. Even though their hockey resume would suffice, all of the garbage that would come with them, I don't know if they want to put themselves in that beep storm, if you know what I mean.
One of the two? Would you be okay with one of the two? Honestly, Joe, at this point, and I don't want to come across sound like an asshole or anything like that, or but like at this point, man, I just want the most qualified individual, an experienced guy who's won, and like, what he did in his role with this really sucks. But are we going to shoot this guy to the moon now? Like
He's canceled, Frankie.
what
he did
that,
was pretty terrible. Like, let's throw that out there. He didn't just. Anyways, I don't want to talk.
Are there other good coaches? Yes, Joe.
Yes.
Absolutely. And guys are out there. I really like Peter Laviolette. If we're talking, I think that's a guy. Again, he's been to the Stanley Cup final 3 times with 3 different teams. He's an American guy who could come in on Austin Matthews. He's a decent guy. There is one guy though. There is one guy.
Jedi or Mike Tyson. Bring him back. Where is he coaching now? In China?
Mike Keenan. There is one guy though who I think deserves another shot at it, who was a head coach in his brief stint. I am a big fan of Andrew Burnett. I think that he should have been actually coach of the year when he took over for Quenneville in Florida. So he has head coaching experience. I believe he's with the Hurricanes now, or the Devils. Sorry, the Devils. And he's probably the succession to Lindy Ruff, but Lindy Ruff is actually getting another contract. So I think he's available. That is a guy who I'd look at. And I know we're talking about coaches, but like that's the type of guy I would look as a progressive guy, players coach, seems pretty good, well respected, but also a head coach who's actually had some success. So that's kind of where I'm looking towards.
All right, Frankie, it's going to be a really interesting next couple of weeks. That is for sure. And like we said, whoever gets hired here, they're going to have to get to work right away. So there's no time to ease into the job, get to familiarize yourself with a lot of people in the organization. No. It's down to work, if you know what I mean. So
we already talked about 2 names. So we talked about
who's the last guy.
My number one choice on who I want, the choice who it probably will end up being in Pridham, okay. But then there's the choice who it could be. And there's a guy that I really like. His name's kind of out there. But for me, would be an outstanding candidate. He was the architect of the LA Kings, and call him quote unquote dynasty of their Stanley Cup runs. He was never a GM, but he was an assistant general manager from 2000. He was with the Kings from 2007 and was their AGM from, I believe, actually he was VP of Hockey Ops. So I'm sorry, from 14 all the way to 2019, 2020. Mike Fuda's a name who I'm surprised hasn't got more traction as a general manager. He's from here. He's a Henry Carr alum, so he's a Toronto guy. And I think there's a guy there. Teams are missing out big time. I would definitely give that guy at least 2 interviews because he would be an excellent candidate in my opinion. Better than some of the names that have been thrown out there right now. So
he was on Kiprios' show a bunch of times. It sounds like he'd be interested in the Leaf job because he always had quite the opinions of this team. So I think he'd have an interesting way of reshaping this roster. That's for sure.
Joe, can I ask you a question? When LA won those cups with a cap, did you not look at that team and say, Jesus, I wish that team was the Leafs? How they won their cups? That's all I got to say.
There were times, definitely. Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. All right, Frankie. Well, I don't know if we could top those last 2 press conferences. I don't know what the next one's going to be, but
apparently Dubas will be. From what I hear, Dubas will be speaking soon, and when he does, I expect another doozy. Whether he's speaking just to the media in general or when he gets his next job, that's coming, man. So I hold on to your seat for that one.
And we'll be here to break it all down for you. So, everyone, thanks again for tuning in to the Puck and Leafs podcast. I'm Joe Choss with Coach Frank. And let's go Leafs. It's going to be quite the ride. Get your popcorn ready for the next couple of weeks, Leafs Nation.